Hello there. Today, I'd like to take you on a softly spoken audio tour of a splendid English country estate with many intriguing royal connections. Hatfield House in Hertfordshire. Hatfield has an incredible history, especially for fans of the Tudor monarch Queen Elizabeth I. And it contains some breathtaking Jacobean interiors. The staterooms at Hatfield are so beautiful that they've been used in many period dramas and films. Most recently in the Oscar-winning film The Favourite, which we're going to talk about later on. In this tour, I'm going to lead you through the main rooms of the house and describe their many treasures, as well as exploring the gardens and the old royal palace of Hatfield, where Elizabeth I lived as a child, and where she held her first council of state as Queen. As usual, there'll be photographs on the video to accompany our tour, but you don't have to look at them if you don't want to. If you prefer, you can just close your eyes, relax, and let my voice guide you. So, welcome to Hatfield. Let's begin by standing in front of the main house and admiring it from the outside while I tell you a little bit about its history. This jewel of English architecture was built in 1611 by Robert Cecil, the first Earl of Salisbury, who was Elizabeth I's Secretary of State, and then later Lord High Treasurer under her successor, James I. In Elizabeth's time, Hatfield had been a royal palace and the Queen's former home, but James I didn't care for it. He much preferred the Earl of Salisbury's family seat, Theobald's Palace, and so he persuaded the Earl to swap properties, and Robert Cecil promptly pulled down most of the original Tudor palace at Hatfield and used the bricks to build himself a magnificent new house. Today, Hatfield is known as a prodigy house, which is the term given to a large and expensive house that was built as a showcase of wealth and power, and which was luxurious enough to accommodate any visiting monarchs. Hatfield has certainly fulfilled that role over the years, so let's go in now, up a shallow flight of stone steps, and through the elegant stone porch on the north front of the house to begin our exploration. We first step into a vestibule, colonnaded by white pillars, and pass through a door in an elaborately carved oak screen into the marble hall. Named after its checkerboard black and white marble floor, this majestic room is 30 feet wide and 50 feet long, while its height occupies a full 2 floors of the house. If we look up, we can be amazed by the lavishly decorated ceiling, which features carved wood and gilded plasterwork decorations, framing scenes that were painted by the Italian artist Taldini. The same artist also decorated the beautiful curved panels that ornament the minstrel's gallery at the other end of the room. Like the screen that we passed through on our way into the hall, this minstrel's gallery is made of rich, glowing oak wood and is sumptuously carved, while oak panelling also flanks the adjacent wall, where there's a tall carved chimney piece. This is also exquisitely decorated with 2 giant carved oak scallop shells, and above these shells hang 3 notable paintings. On the left, a picture of Mary Queen of Scots, on the right, a portrait of her son, James I, and in between them, directly above the fireplace, a portrait of a white horse, which is traditionally said to be the horse ridden by Queen Elizabeth I when she famously addressed her troops at Tilbury before the Battle of the Spanish Armada. While these large canvases catch the eye, the most intriguing portrait in this hall hangs on the far side of the room, on the partition wall made by the Minstrel's Gallery. This is the Rainbow Portrait, one of the great treasures of Hatfield House, and it depicts Queen Elizabeth I in a sumptuous gown embroidered with flowers, over which she is wearing a mantle lined in vivid orange silk. This silk lining is rather extraordinary when you look at it closely, because it's embroidered all over with eyes and ears, which symbolise Elizabeth's power and her determination to foil plots against her reign by suggesting that she has eyes and ears everywhere. On the sleeve of the mantle, there's also an embroidery of a large snake, which represents her wisdom, and also, perhaps, her cunning, while the elaborate crown on her glowing red hair reminds the viewer of her absolute monarchy. The Queen's hair is also decorated with pearls, and she wears pearl earrings and necklaces because pearls symbolise virginity and reinforce her status as the Virgin Queen. In her right hand, she holds a rainbow, although sadly this has lost most of its colour with age, but an inscription painted onto the canvas just above it states "Non sine sole iris," no rainbow without the sun. This is a portrait designed to show Elizabeth at the height of her powers, as a dazzling Sun Queen, but the rainbow is also a traditional symbol of peace, so by holding it securely in her hand, the Queen also becomes the steadfast protector of her nation's safety. There is so much symbolism in this extraordinary portrait that we could spend half an hour decoding it. But let's continue our tour now and pass through a door in the Minstrel's Gallery screen to the grand staircase. This extravagantly carved flight of oak stairs features newel posts topped with putti and mythical creatures. And if you've already listened to my tour of Temple Newsam, which is another Jacobean great house in Yorkshire, then these newel posts might seem somewhat familiar to you. In fact, Temple Newsam has an almost identical staircase to this one, although it's the Hatfield staircase that's the original, while the one at Temple Newsam is a later copy. The Earl of Salisbury installed this flight of stairs when Hatfield was built in 1611, although it was slightly modified later on, because as well as being topped with fantastic beasts and cherubs, one of the newel posts also features a carving of John Tradescant. Tradescant was a celebrated naturalist and collector, and his London home, the Ark, would become a famous cabinet of curiosities and the first museum to be opened to the public in England. However, this newel post on the stairs reminds us that at the very beginning of his career, Tradescant had been a gardener, and his first job was working for the Earl of Salisbury at Hatfield. At the top of the stairs, we'll turn right and enter the King James drawing room, which is hung with tapestries and crowned with a lavishly decorated white and gold ceiling. This room is named after a large statue of James I that presides over the mantelpiece, and which is made of stone, painted to look like bronze. In spite of its grandeur and size, this room has quite a warm and inviting atmosphere, which is partly due to the tapestries that cover the walls, and also the many paintings that cover the tapestries. Every wall is covered in canvases, some of which are old masters. But once again, it's a portrait of Queen Elizabeth I that catches the visitor's attention. Also full of symbolism, this painting is known as the Ermine portrait because it shows the Queen sitting in a black dress with an ermine crouched upon her arm. Ermine is the name given to a common stoat during the winter season when it sheds its normally brown fur and develops a beautiful all-white coat. Because of this white colour, the ermine was considered to be a symbol of purity, and so, like the pearls in the rainbow portrait, it's included here to underline Elizabeth's role as the Virgin Queen. A golden sword of state symbolises her power, while a sprig of olive that she holds in her right hand stands for peace. Once again, this is a portrait designed to carry a message of majesty and might. And, wearing one of the huge white ruffs that would become synonymous with Tudor court dress, Elizabeth certainly looks suited to the role of glorious queen. Walking down to the other end of the drawing room, we can pass through an anteroom lined with carved oak panelling and go into the Chinese bedroom, which is decorated in a very different style to the rest of the house. This room was originally part of a much larger suite that was specifically built to house the King, James I, during royal visits. However, it was later remodelled and became first a billiard room, then a sitting room, and then finally, in the 19th century, a bedroom. The walls are covered in a gorgeous wallpaper from China, which features scenes of delicate white trees and birds, hand-painted onto an intense emerald green background. The four-poster bed, which also dates from the 19th century, is draped with yellow damask hangings, while the floor-to-ceiling chimney-piece has been painted dark red to mimic the effect of Chinese lacquer. A further oriental touch is added in one corner of the room by an ornamental birdcage that is flanked by 4 whimsical-looking gilded dragons. Turning back into the anteroom now, we pass between 2 fluted oak columns and enter the long gallery. Measuring an astonishing 170 feet in length, this room certainly lives up to its name, and it features an absolutely stunning plasterwork ceiling that is covered in gold leaf and illuminates the whole room with a warm, gilded glow. Long galleries were a popular feature in Jacobean houses and were designed to allow the residents to take exercise indoors when it was raining outside. So, let's promenade together down this gallery, stopping for a moment to peep into the little oak-panelled North Gallery, which is where the musicians who were playing for guests in the marble hall below would have sat with their instruments. As we walk down this long room, we can admire a selection of treasures that have been put out on display, including a posset set carved from rock crystal and a glass case that contains a pair of gloves with long pointed fingers, a pair of stockings, and a wide-brimmed hat. These are all clearly very well-preserved textile pieces from the Elizabethan era, which would make them interesting enough in themselves. However, they gain even more significance when we discover that all 3 pieces are reputed to have once been worn by Queen Elizabeth I herself. Halfway down the long gallery, we'll turn right into the winter dining room. This oak-panelled chamber has a long mahogany dining table at its centre, which is laid up for a banquet of 14 people, with elegant white linen and silverware. Around the fireplace, there's a magnificently carved marble chimney-piece that bears the Salisbury coat of arms, and on either side of it, the walls are hung with a quartet of large, colourful tapestries. These depict the 4 seasons and are illustrated with charming scenes of rural life during the 17th century. Unlike most tapestries from this period, which tended to be woven in or around Brussels, this set was produced in England by the celebrated weaver Ralph Sheldon. He created the tapestries in 1611, which was the same year that Hatfield House was built, but they weren't actually made for this house. Originally, they belonged to Toddington Manor in Gloucestershire, and they were only brought to this house in 1846, when the second Marquess of Salisbury bought them in order to impress Queen Victoria, who was paying a visit. Returning to the long gallery, we'll continue to the far end and pass through an anteroom, where we can stop to admire an intriguing parchment roll. This extraordinary Elizabethan document, which measures 22 feet in length, is covered with illuminated illustrations of heraldic devices, and it depicts a rather fanciful ancestral tree for Queen Elizabeth I. This colourful pedigree was designed to affirm the Queen's right to succession, but it does so in a rather fanciful way by claiming her as a descendant of both William the Conqueror and Julius Caesar, as well as King Arthur, King Lear, and Adam and Eve. From the anteroom, we can step forward into the library, which is my favourite room in Hatfield House. The first thing we see when we enter the room are 3 enormous bay windows on the opposite wall to the door that overlook the gardens. However, the other 3 walls in this wonderful room are lined entirely with floor-to-ceiling bookcases that hold nearly 10,000 books. An upper gallery, fitted with an iron balustrade, runs right around these bookcases, just above the level of the doors, with a convenient staircase at each end of the library to allow access to the topmost bookshelves. The only place where this upper gallery breaks off is above the fireplace, where there's a full-height marble chimney-piece that showcases an extraordinary mosaic portrait of Robert Cecil, the first Earl of Salisbury. The mosaic was made in Venice and was presented to the Earl as a gift from the English ambassador, Sir Henry Wotton, who is remembered today for his rather indiscreet quotation, "An ambassador is an honest gentleman sent to lie abroad for the good of his country." Wandering around this sumptuous room, you might find that the library looks a little familiar to you, even if you've never visited Hatfield House before. This is because it's appeared in many films and TV series over the years, including Shakespeare in Love, Tomb Raider, Wonder Woman, Batman, Band of Brothers, Agatha Christie's Poirot, and, perhaps most fittingly of all, Elizabeth the Golden Age. However, most recently, the house has also played a prominent part in the award-winning film The Favourite, which was mainly shot on location here. This library, with the addition of a 4-poster bed, was turned into the bedchamber of the Duchess of Marlborough for the film, and it features in a memorable scene where Rachel Weisz, as the Duchess, stands on one of the library staircases that leads to the upper gallery and hurls several books at the head of her cousin, played by Emma Stone. Presumably, she didn't use any of the real books from the library's collection. Other rooms in the house that feature in the film include the Marble Hall, which becomes the setting for a banquet, the King James Drawing Room, which doubles as the bedchamber of Queen Anne, and the Long Gallery, which can be seen several times in the background as various characters march up and down it in their quests for power and influence. The film has won many prestigious awards, including an Oscar for Olivia Colman as Queen Anne. However, while all 3 of the central actors give absolutely brilliant performances, I think that the 4th member of the ensemble is Hatfield House itself, which adds a great deal of atmosphere and drama to the film with its incredible interiors. Leaving the library, let's walk down another, plainer flight of oak stairs, known as the Adam and Eve staircase, and turn through another anteroom into the chapel. This beautiful room was consecrated in 1618 and is still used today for church services. Like so many other rooms in the house, the chapel is sumptuously ornamented, with a lavishly decorated ceiling and an upper gallery that is fitted with roundels, containing portraits of various apostles and saints. These are part of the original decoration of the chapel, as are the beautiful Jacobean stained glass windows that depict scenes from the Old Testament. However, the fact that they remain in this room untouched could be viewed, appropriately enough, as some kind of miracle, because in 1835 a fire broke out at Hatfield, which destroyed many of the rooms at this end of the house. It would have destroyed the chapel too, but in an incredible instance of good luck, the room was saved, partly due to a sudden burst of torrential rain and partly by the fire itself, which melted the lead water tanks in the attics and sent a cascade down to the chapel to quench the flames. Consequently, the upper gallery and the stained glass were saved, although 30 years after the fire, in 1869, the ground floor of the chapel was refurbished. Wooden pews were added, as well as a grand new organ, which was decorated and gilded by Giulio Taldini, whose beautiful painted panels we've already seen in the marble hall. We'll come across another organ at one end of the next room we'll explore, which is the Armoury. This long room, which also features a black and white checkerboard floor, was originally an open cloister on the south side of the house. However, it was turned into a covered corridor in 1834, when the cloister arches were filled in with elaborately filigreed windows to provide a convenient indoor passage that would link the east and west wings of the house. In keeping with the room's name, several suits of armour flank the room, and most of it is Elizabethan, with some said to have once belonged to the troops of the Spanish Armada. However, none of this armour came to Hatfield until the 19th century, when it was purchased for the house from the Tower of London. The next set of rooms we'll visit take us down an iron spiral staircase and into the domestic kitchens, a series of chambers which were in use from 1611 all the way through to 1939. The main kitchen is a large and surprisingly airy space with an enormous fireplace fitted with a cast iron range and a large cream-painted dresser. Leading off this room, there's a still room, a scullery, and a pastry room, which is where ingredients would have been stored and prepared for sweet banqueting treats, such as cakes, biscuits, and marchpane, a Tudor and Jacobean delicacy which was the forerunner of marzipan. The kitchens are the final rooms to see in the main house. However, our tour is far from over, as we still have the original old palace building to explore. As most of this palace was pulled down by the first Earl of Salisbury, there's only one wing of it left today. However, that wing contains an impressive banqueting hall, where Elizabeth I held her very first Council of State after being made Queen. The young Elizabeth had lived at the old palace, along with her elder sister Mary and her younger brother, Edward. It's said that she had a happy childhood at the palace and was fond of it, even though her sister Mary had her placed under house arrest here after the death of their brother Edward, when Mary was named Queen. After her death, in 1558, Elizabeth succeeded to the throne at the tender age of 25, and, standing in this lofty banqueting hall, with its intricately engineered ceiling vaults of oak and chestnut beams, it's easy to imagine the young Queen Elizabeth walking into this room, ready to greet her royal ministers for the very first time as Queen. The old palace is situated within a charming Elizabethan-inspired box garden, or parterre, which contains many clipped topiary bushes, as well as a delightful miniature hedge maze. Beyond the parterre is the west garden, which has a circular pond fitted with a fountain, and many delightful herbaceous borders planted with roses, iris, geraniums, and a variety of other gorgeous flowers. An avenue of shady pleached lime trees leads the visitor on to the next garden, which is known as the Sundial Garden because it now features a large sundial that was added to mark the 400th anniversary of Hatfield House in 2011. These are just some of the gardens that can be explored at Hatfield. There are many acres of woodlands and park to stroll through, and it's the perfect place to spend a warm and sunny summer afternoon. That concludes our tour of Hatfield House, and I hope you've enjoyed exploring this marvellous building with me and learning all about its connections to Elizabeth I. I'll put a link to the official Hatfield House website in the description below the video in case you want to plan a visit there for yourself. Meanwhile, I hope you'll be able to join me again soon for another relaxing audio adventure. Until then, thank you for your company. Goodbye.